In this video, we are going to take a look at the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening is a religious event that takes place in the 1800s. But in order to really understand what the Second Great Awakening is, we sort of have to understand how it got started. The Second Great Awakening got started with an event known as the Cane Ridge Revival. And the guy who started the Cane Ridge Revival was a man named Barton W. Stone. Barton Stone was born in Maryland in 1772. And when he was a very young boy, his father died, and his family made the choice to move away from Maryland, which is, of course, part of the original 13 United States, and they decided to leave Maryland and move west, out to what at the time was known as the frontier. Eventually, that's going to become the state of Kentucky. So when he's a young boy who moves out to the frontier, out to what's going to be Kentucky, and while he's growing up, he becomes very interested in religion. He wants to be a minister. So in other words, he wants to be a guy who's in charge of a church, a guy who gets up in front of the church and preaches and teaches what the Bible says. He's very interested in religion. Barton W. Stone wants to become a minister. He wants to become a preacher. But he's very confused. He's not sure which church he wants to be a part of. He sees good things in a lot of the different churches. And these different churches are known as denominations. And a denomination is just a different type of church. So while there are many different churches who maybe all believe in some similar things, they don't always believe in all of the exact same things. And so you get these different church denominations. And Barton W. Stone, he just doesn't know which church he wants to be a part of. But eventually, Stone decides to become a minister in a local church there in Kentucky. But over time, he begins to want to discuss his ideas with more people and sort of test his ideas out and see who agrees with him about different religious ideas and see who doesn't agree with him. He decides what he wants to do is he wants to create a meeting. And at this meeting, he wants to try to get different preachers, different ministers to come and express their different viewpoints. But this meeting becomes very successful, and it actually turns into what we would think today as a festival. It becomes known as the Cane Ridge Revival. It happens in Cane Ridge, Kentucky, where Barton Stone lives. The Cane Ridge Revival was his idea, and it becomes very successful. 20,000 people, they say. I read different numbers. I read 10 to 20,000. I read other statistics that said 23,000. I think it's safe to say around 20,000 people showed up to this event. And that was a lot of people. This drawing up here sort of illustrates the amount of people. Because as you can see up here in the front, you see a lot of people. But as you look to the back here, and over here, you see how many people are actually at this meeting. And it's not just Stone who's speaking. At least 20 different preachers from different churches, all right, different denominations. They spoke at the event. So it wasn't just Stone expressing his views to everyone else. It was Stone who wanted to throw this meeting, to throw this festival, this get-together, this religious meeting. He wanted to do this so that different preachers could get together and share their ideas. And historians generally think of this Cane Ridge Revival as the first major event of Second Great Awakening. So the Second Great Awakening was just that. It was the second time that this had happened. There was actually a First Great Awakening that we have discussed in our class earlier in the year. Just to kind of give you a review, it happened back in the 1700s, back when the 13 colonies still existed, back before the United States was around, back when the 13 British colonies were still in existence. The nation, or the future nation, went through what was called the First Great Awakening. And it was a religious revival, which is very similar to the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening is going to take place in the 1800s, and at this point, the United States is now a very young country that's just getting started. But there are two different awakenings that take place in America. So they do have some similarities, both focused on religious freedom, both centered around religious choice, and at the end of the day, both express the fact that religion was for everyone. So in America, we have freedom of religion. If you want to go to a church, you can. If you don't want to go to a church, you can. And in addition to that, everyone doesn't have to go to the same church. People are free to choose their church. People are free to start their own churches. And that's something that's very unique to America. Not everyone has that particular freedom. The Second Great Awakening was an important movement that took place starting in the early 1800s and going on through the rest of the 1800s, that would go on to inspire several different movements that would come just a little bit later. But the Second Great Awakening is important because it really focuses on the fact that people are saved through good deeds. It also focused on the fact that anyone, not just elite people, but anyone could actually change their ways, be a good person, do good deeds, and they could be saved through these good things that they would do. People in America became more spiritual during the Second Great Awakening, and focusing on these good deeds, which they believed would get them to heaven, would also have another effect. It would go on to inspire other movements. This movement, to focus on good deeds, inspired the reform movements of the 1800s. So as we move forward in this class, we're going to talk about other movements that get started a little bit later in the 1800s, and they also focus on this idea of good deeds. Okay? If you're a good person, good things will happen to you. And this idea of good deeds would inspire other movements that would happen later, such as the abolitionist movement and the women's suffrage movement. The Second Great Awakening opens the eyes of a lot of people. And when it does, people start to question a lot of things. People realize that owning slaves is not a good thing. This abolition movement begins to free the slaves, to end the slave trade. People start to understand that this is not something that needs to be a part of the United States. People also realize that men and women are created equal, and people of all different races are created equal. And so the women's suffrage movement gets started right around the same time, and maybe a little bit after the abolitionist movement gets started. But these events, these movements that happen later in the 1800s are inspired by the Second Great Awakening and the idea that good things happen to good people, and that in order to have a good nation, you need to have good people who do good deeds. Does everyone have to go to church? No. But the fact that people are becoming more spiritual is leading them to open their eyes to things that are right and to things that are wrong, which is going to lead to the abolitionist movement. It's also going to lead to the women's suffrage movement.